Well, good evening, you ghoulish lot. Back for another horrible story to end your weekend with. I hope you've all had a good weekend. So tonight's story is by a lady called Dulcie Gray, who was a very famous actress and singer of stage and screen. That she was like, she epitomised that demure glamour of the 40s and 50s and wowed audiences all over the globe. And if you Google it, look at photos of her, she's this beautiful, stylish woman. And yet, she wrote some pretty ghastly stories as well, which I find really interesting. There's always a darkness deep down. So it's tiny print, so it's Grandad Glasses time. Speaking of demure. See? Right then. So it's called Dream House, and it's by Dulcie Gray. They sat side by side on the sofa in my office, and I thought I'd never seen a more incongruous pair. She was enormously fat and about 50. He was small and thin and obviously several years younger. She had a huge round face, brown eyes and lank dark hair. His hair was sandy, and his eyes were a watery grey. She was monstrously plain. He was good-looking in a neat, rather efficient way. She talked. He remained silent for most of the time. For a large woman, she was very vivacious. She waved her beautiful hands when she spoke, and when she laughed, which was often, she showed 2 rows of still excellent teeth. And so, you see, she said finally, we thought we'd come to you. Yeah, indeed, I murmured politely. I see. It's not just a question of money, I have plenty, but my husband likes to work. Her husband nodded expressionlessly. Not that he ever holds anything down for long. He seems to get bored, don't you, Henry? Henry protested. My dear, that isn't strictly true. Well, not bored exactly, but we like to travel, and we do travel, don't we, Henry? You're used to it, my dear, said Henry. Yes, said the woman complacently. I'm used to it. I travelled as a girl, you see, and my first husband was very well off, so I suppose I got the bug. I met Henry on one of my travels. Didn't I, Henry? Yes, dear. Australia, you know. I expect you could tell by the accent. He's trying to get rid of it. I glanced at the man, but beyond a slight flickering of his sandy eyelashes, his face was still impassive. The woman continued, So what can you do for us? Well, I said cautiously, your request is a little unusual, but you're perfectly right, the house is empty at the moment, though whether Lord Drummond wishes to let, I've got no idea. However, if you leave it with me, I'll see what I can do. Good? She rose splendidly. Will you please let me know as soon as you have any information? Of course, I said, and I'll do my very best for you. I'm sure you will. She smiled at me graciously, drew her sable cape around her shoulders and put on her gloves. Come, Henry, she said, and the 2 of them went out of the room. I telephoned Lord Drummond almost immediately, and he seemed not averse to the idea. I'd have to know more about them, of course, and I'd like references and so on, but it might be quite a good thing. The house fell empty when my agent's wife died, and I've no one in mind as a replacement at the moment. It is a very isolated house, although it's on the estate, so they're unlikely to bother me. But would it bother them, do you suppose? Are they townspeople? We'd better have a trial period, I think, say 18 months. One thing I'd like to know, though, is how they came to discover the house at all. I wrote to Mrs. Denchworth, telling her what Lord Drummond had said, including his enquiry, and she replied by return of post, saying that she and her husband were delighted, especially her husband, who'd set his heart on the house because he'd been in England during the war and had been billeted in the village, where he'd seen it and fallen in love with it. In due course, their references came through and they met Lord Drummond, who had telephoned me to say that I could proceed with the arrangements as soon as I liked. "Rum pair," he said. "She's pretty ghastly, but he seems quite a decent little chap. Anyway, they appear solvent. He's been offered an excellent job here in Blaydon," which is why they wanted the place, "as a constructional engineer, so I'll give it a try. I'll be away most of the winter in any case, so I shan't see much of them, and they're willing to pay a tidy price." I heard no more from the Denchworths until Christmas. Mr. Denchworth must have written the card because the handwriting was different from that on all previous communications. He wrote, "Thank you for arranging the house for us. My wife calls it her dream house. So do I. We are both well. Best wishes, Marjorie and Henry Denchworth." I threw it away with the rest of the cards on January the 6th and thought no more about them, until I had occasion to visit Lord Drummond that same month about another of the houses at Blaydon, and being free at tea time or thereabouts, I decided to call on them. Mrs. Denchworth seemed pleased to see me. Her husband less so. She graciously gave me tea out of a silver pot, being very much like the lady of the manor, and she ordered him about more like a lackey than a husband, and scolded him for putting the milk in his own tea first. "So common," she said. I gathered that she was getting on his nerves a good deal, although he didn't say anything, but he went white when she disparaged Australia and corrected his accent, and looked daggers when she ordered him out of the room to get some more hot water for the tea. She, however, seemed oblivious of any undercurrents of strain, and was very excited about some alterations that Denchworth was doing to the house. "He's doing them all absolutely single-handed," she said proudly. "Building is obviously a sideline of his, and he's doing it all quite beautifully." When the 18 months were up, once again I heard from Mr. Denchworth. "My wife and I are not renewing the lease," he wrote. "We've been very happy here, and Lord Drummond has been an excellent landlord, but my wife wishes to travel. England gets too cold for her in the winter. She's used to the sun, so we're off to Honolulu in a few weeks' time." I happened to run into Lord Drummond shortly after this in St. James's Street. After the usual greetings, I remarked that I'd heard from the Denchworths and enquired whether he wished to re-let the house. "I don't see why not," he said. "It was quite a success. They were no trouble at all, devoted to each other apparently, and kept themselves to themselves. I can't understand it, really. Each one to his taste and all that, but she wasn't my idea of a perfect mate. Talk, 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 mean with the purse strings, and years older than him. What's more, she made him drop the job for this Honolulu business. And he was well liked in the village. Spent quite a lot of money on the house too, which seems a waste under the circumstances. Splendid for me though, of course. So, no complaints. First class constructional engineer, they tell me. First class. Ah, well, it takes all sorts. All sorts. He waved his umbrella at me, and we parted. I only saw Densworth once again. I'd been sent to Jamaica on business, and while I was there, I went to Round Hill for a drink and a swim. Round Hill is one of the most luxurious hotels in the world, and Densworth looked prosperous and happy. He seemed surprised to see me, but very affable, and inquired after Lord Drummond. I told him that his lordship was well, and not unnaturally asked after his wife. At once his face clouded. "She's dead," he said sadly. I miss her terribly." "Oh, I'm sorry," I mumbled. "I had no idea." "Yeah, very sudden. Very sudden. I'll never meet anyone like her again." Before I could question him further, a very pretty girl came up to talk to him, and since I was now getting late for my business appointment, I hurried away, and soon forgot all about him. And that was the last I ever saw of him. I heard from him the other day. The letter was posthumous, and it read as follows. "My dear Andrews, this is a rather delicate matter, and I hesitate to write directly to Lord Drummond, but I think he ought to be told. You will remember that you were good enough to arrange that my wife and I were able to rent his house, Milton House, in Blaydon, some years ago, and his lordship was very kind to us. Among other things, he was good enough to let me do some decorations and alterations. The house needed modernising. Actually, it needed more bathrooms, and we put those in at our own expense. Lord Drummond expressed himself delighted, which pleased me. What might distress him, however, should he or anyone else do further structural alterations, is that my wife is walled up between the bathroom and the dressing room of the principal bedroom suite. My wife always said that bedroom suite was a revolting expression, but I can't describe what I mean more accurately. I married my wife for her money, because, as she quite rightly used to say, I was too lazy to like work. She never stopped nagging at me for this, though what she thought I or anyone else would have married her for at her age and with her looks, I can't imagine. After almost 5 intolerable years, I determined to get rid of her. I thought out ways and means as any murderer must do, and was beginning to despair of the arranging of it when an English friend, who I met when I was in the Air Force in Britain during the war, wrote to me and offered me a job in his newly opened factory in Blaydon. Here was my chance. You see, Milton House was the perfect house for my scheme. I knew it well from the days where I was stationed at Blaydon, and it was also extremely convenient for the job at the factory. Now, if it transpired that the house was empty, I was on my way to my heart's desire. I wrote to my friend inquiring about this, and he told me that I was in luck, so I accepted his offer, and you know the rest. I had little difficulty persuading my wife to come to you before she herself had seen the house, but she was delighted to be back in the old country, since she herself, as you know, was English. And she was also, in her own way, rather moved that I seemed to want to settle down and earn my own living. I told her that I'd fallen in love with Milton, and that it was all that I'd ever dreamed of as a home, and the perfect setting for her. And indeed, that is precisely, in the end, what it turned out to be. Even without Lord Drummond's cooperation in allowing me to make my alterations, Milton was full of possibilities. But he, of course, made everything plain sailing. I'd well remembered from my wartime visits the secret passage, dating from the Civil War, in the side of the great open fireplace in the drawing room, and I remembered how the chimney itself, on its way to the outer air, encroached in a great bay of brick into the principal bedroom. I only needed to tell my wife that the bay of brick gave the room character for her to disagree violently and demand that it be hidden. It was, in fact, ugly, and Lord Drummond, who has considerable taste, readily agreed to the wall being built out level with it on the other side, especially as one of those two hollow spaces so formed was to be part of the new bathroom. My wife's body was in the other. I won't bore you with details, but when the time came, I invited her into the space, hit her hard on the head with what's commonly known as a blunt instrument, walled her up, and there she still is. Her disappearance was unremarked, because a few weeks previously she'd bought an extremely expensive house in Honolulu, which of course I've since sold at a reasonable profit, and also because I had the foresight to suggest that my wife should go to London a week ahead of me to buy clothes, and so far as anyone in Bladen knew, I drove her to London with all her luggage to have her little feminine shopping spree. Her luggage, I presume, is still at Paddington Station at the left luggage office. Unlabelled, of course. By the time this reaches you, I shall, alas, have rejoined her, in the bourne from which no traveller, etc., etc. Which simply means, in the flowery language that my wife liked, so much that I shall be dead. I've been ill for a year now, and the doctors have pronounced me incurable. I have enjoyed my all too short time on my late wife's money very much, and among other things, I've been able to repay countless kindnesses, since the bank believes my wife to be alive still, and her handwriting being fortunately a very easy one to copy. Lord Bladen's kindness also requires repayment, hence this letter. Yours sincerely, Henry Denchworth. P.S. I got the idea of walling her up, more or less by chance, and since I've come this far in my confession to you, I might as well go further and tell you that she's my fourth victim. The remains of my mother and sister are under the cement floor of number 104 Peregrine Place, South Yarra, Melbourne, Australia. I was making alterations to our own home at the time, and this seemed like an ideal place for the disposal of the bodies. Like my wife, they were dominating women, against whom, and in the end, I had to rebel. My third victim was a girl I got into the family way, another expression my wife regarded as vulgar. This murder was discovered, since in order to dispose of her body, I had dismembered her and hidden various portions of her anatomy round an isolated farm some 70 miles north of Sydney. Her headless torso, in a brown paper flour bag, was unfortunately not well enough buried, and again, unfortunately, the owner of the farm was executed for the crime, since it was not known that I'd been in the district that night. So, you will understand that when it came to the point of deciding to kill my wife, I wished to go back to Method A, which had been so successful. There was one worrying change in the circumstances of the last murder, however, and I must say that for a couple of days I was in considerable distress. I told you that I hit my wife on the head with a blunt instrument before walling her up. Well, I didn't hit her hard enough. And once incarcerated, she came to. And for 2.5 days, she screamed, banged on the wall, and tried to get free. Worrying for me, to say the least, and it nearly upset the arrangements. However, in the end, all was well. P.P.S. My wife considered postscripts both vulgar and effeminate. She had a theory that if one had anything interesting to say, one automatically contained it in the letter itself. I trust I haven't bored you. HD. So, yeah. Dulcie Gray is a fine example that you can never tell what's going on beneath the surface. The surface may be affable and stylish, but deep down there's a darkness. Anyway, I hope you lot are keeping well and staying safe, and I will see you all next Sunday for another thrilling story.